Chicago is one of those bands that I gave up on decades ago. Too many lineup changes and too much of a desire to please the mistress of radio slowly turned this once progressive jazz rock band into a mostly forgettable soft rock act during the 80s. An act that produced disposable hits for an audience that disposed of them after that era passed away. When a band's lineup changes this much, it's really not fair to expect them to sound the same as they did in their heyday. But these days, it's the hits from that heyday, when the band really flexed its musical muscle, that listeners still react strongest to, and not the later era of more disposable hits. And that's why I confronted Now, the latest album from Chicago, with a certain amount of trepidation. Only 4 remaining members of the original lineup are still in the band. Like I said, it's unfair to expect this band to sound the same as it did in the late 60s and 70s, but surprisingly, Now goes a long way in sounding like that version of Chicago. The 80s sheen is still there, but this time, its members, both new and old, are flexing their musical muscle. I just wish they'd pushed themselves just a little bit farther in that regard. But there is still plenty to like on this new album for fans who care about more than just the radio hits. The opening title tracks, Now and More Will Be Revealed, are good examples of this. Both are songs about living in the here and now, but from different perspectives, and in fact the two songs bookend each other quite well. Both carry that 80s pop sheen, but are deceptive in that they both feature musically complex horn arrangements. Now is one of the album's best songs, and with its high falsetto vocals is probably, I think, one of the best songs that Earth, Wind & Fire hasn't recorded yet. Seriously, if I had heard this song without the context of knowing what album it was from, I would have guessed that it was recorded by Earth, Wind & Fire, and not Chicago. But that doesn't change the fact that it's a great song, and it's also highlighted by a killer guitar solo. The third track, America, is a bit trickier because it's political in nature. And political songs can be tricky because it's hard not to come off as annoyingly preachy or trite. The lyrics do come off a bit trite for my tastes, but I find myself tuning out the actual lyrics as I listen and focusing more on the great melody and musical riffs of this song. And I come out really enjoying this song at the end of it. Tonally also, this song feels more like classic Chicago than the album's previous 2 tracks. 3 tracks in, and I have to say that it's good to hear the horn section reasserted in a Chicago album. It's hard to believe that one of the signature elements of this band was so buried during the 80s. Now, there are a few downturns on this album. The 4th track and the 6th track, Crazy Happy and Love Lives On, to me are throwbacks to the soft rock version of this band. There is some nice horn and guitar work trying to elevate Crazy Happy, which is the better of these two, but I can't recommend either of these 2 songs very much. But these are the album's only 2 downturns, and those are pretty good odds for any albums. Track 5, Free at Last, a song about beating back your addictions, opens with a really great muscular guitar riff. And I love how effortlessly the song just moves through its tempo changes between its old school R&B verse to its high octane chorus. Something's Coming, the next track, literally dances in front of you and wants you to dance too, and I think you will be hard pressed not to dance along with it. The next track, Watching All the Colors, with its Spanish-tinged opening acoustic guitar riff and accompanying horns, is one of those laid-back yet somehow still energetic Sunday afternoon songs. It's beautiful. Now, for these last 3 songs, this band has stayed fairly pop, but has kept it interesting by the inclusion of interesting musical flourishes and by keeping the melodies strong. But in the next 2 tracks, She's a Nice Girl and In the Garden of Allah, the band really becomes more progressive and musically daring. Now, writing catchy songs was a trademark of the original Chicago, but so was experimentation and not being afraid to just stretch out instrumentally and jam. So it's good to hear the band more fully embrace this with these next 2 songs. Like I said earlier, I wish they would have embraced this ethos just a little bit more, and maybe even just given us an instrumental track or 2 as well. But that doesn't diminish what is good about not just these 2 tracks, but what is also good about this entire album. In fact, after hearing track 10, In the Garden of Allah, I wish that the album had just ended there, rather than with its 11th and last track, Another Trippy Day. Don't get me wrong, Another Trippy Day is a good R&B song with some good grooves. I think it should have been placed earlier in the album. It's just not as strong as its predecessor. I think the album should have ended with In the Garden of Allah. Now, during the 80s, the progressive rock band Yes managed to update their sound to that decade, get the radio hits, but still be true to their prog rock roots and not alienate their longtime fan base. This album feels like the direction that Chicago should have taken in the 80s, rather than the one they did take. Oh well, you can't cry over spilled milk. But I'm glad that they made this album, and will recommend it to longtime fans. This album is deceptive in its musical complexity in that it can at first, on the surface, sound like an album of empty pop sheen. But I find that this album gets more musically interesting as I listen to it, with each listen, and that my opinion of it improves with each listen too. For Music Worth Buying, this is TJR. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.